So Food Panda, just as a bit of an introduction, was founded in 2012 in Berlin. So,
Singapore.
Huh?
Singapore. We started out in Singapore.
You started in Singapore?
We started out in Singapore.
Well, they're in Berlin now. Well, I learned something new today. So they started in Singapore, and they did expand rather rapidly. They raised over 310 million euros, and they are now operating in 24 countries, and they were in 49 countries at their peak. We've got over 2,000 employees, 180 of them are in Berlin. 1,000 restaurant partners, and they were recently merged with Delivery Hero. And so we are going to be talking a bit today about the process of internationalization. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so tell me, Benjamin, what was some of the drivers behind the decision to internationalize so rapidly?
So maybe one step back, because you were saying we started out in Berlin. We started out in Singapore with a small food delivery business in a small market, very dense market, scaled it to some other Southeast Asian markets, including Thailand, Vietnam, Taiwan. Some very good responses over there also for the food delivery model. Then we said, come on, we have funding, we can build a global business out of this. Food is something that everyone wants. So let's try out a completely different culture. And we went over to Colombia and set up a business in Colombia. Scaled even faster than all the other markets in Southeast Asia. And at that point, we realized that we can't manage it out of Singapore because the time difference is 13 hours. So it's impossible to manage. So we moved our headquarters to Berlin and decided that from then on, we go with what we call the mushroom strategy, with very small amounts going into a lot of markets and testing out the response. So setting up very basic setup, very centralized, only very few people in the country doing sales, doing community management on social media, and doing operations, so working that orders get to the restaurants, and our customer services serviced. Scaled with that to 40 markets within 1 year.
So mushroom strategy being sort of blown spores into new places, keep them in the dark.
Exactly, and grow them slowly with a very centralized, low-cost approach. Very standardized. We only did performance marketing. We managed performance marketing out of Berlin for all markets. Had a same IT product across the world, which had some other challenges, including tax rates in India, which are different by state. But with that strategy, we could rather quickly see which markets gain traction, where there is demand for the business model, and where we can get traction and where we can acquire customers at a profitable customer acquisition cost.
So how important was it to keep standardized when you were initially starting out, and was it as important when you started growing really fast?
I think we underestimated that.
Really? Eh?
So we thought we standardized everything and have a very standardized approach. And then once you start scaling a country quickly and it really gets traction, then you realize what's not standardized. And if you have suddenly 20, 30 markets growing at a rapid pace of 50% growth month over month, it's impossible to fix. And that's probably one of our biggest mistakes, that we didn't standardize enough at the beginning, even though that we had quite some functions centralized. So we had centralized full IT, so we had the same IT product across the world. We had the same marketing approach across the world. We even had our recruiting centralized in Berlin. And so our Berlin HR team was recruiting for people in Indonesia. We only had operations, call center operations, rider operations. We had our own delivery as well as sales localized in the markets.
But you're not primarily a technology company. You had a lot of operations on the ground to deal with. How much of a challenge was that, given your standardized model? Did you have to adapt a lot?
Yeah, that's where it starts, right? Then you start doing own delivery in Indonesia, and then you start setting up a website. We first only had a website. We had a website live in Indonesia, where people could enter their street and their street number. Unfortunately, there are no street names in Indonesia. There are no postal codes in Indonesia. So how do you locate yourself in Indonesia? So that ended up that people put comments in the order field saying, I live behind the mosque the third street on the right, and then the second green door on the left. And then tell that to your delivery rider. And it ended up in a huge mess. So we started out with the app, started to localize much more. We started to set up different location logics. We actually started logics that people could still input where they live, even though there aren't a street name. So we invented a postal code system for Indonesia once, for Jakarta. It was a nightmare, but it worked somehow. Then you talk about delivery, and you talk about how to do delivery. We all know the Fedora guys riding around Berlin and the Deliveroo guys on bikes. That's all nice. And then you get to Moscow, and it's minus 20 degrees in winter and 10 meters of snow. You're not gonna bike. And then what do? Okay, I take a motorbike. Doesn't work. It's not allowed by the government. So you say, okay, well then I take a car, and we all gonna be stuck in traffic, and food is gonna be quite long delivery. That's fine. People are used to that in Moscow. Unfortunately, 3 hours, customers don't accept as delivery time on food. So what we had is then foldable bikes that you could take in the subway. Our delivery boys were sitting in the subway delivering pizza. Now, we had the case in Hong Kong. You have a lot of one-way streets, but you have shortcuts just up the hill. I'm not sure if you've been in Hong Kong. It's built on a mountain, and you have serpentines going up, and by foot you can just walk upstairs all the time. So we have people walking and delivering food in Hong Kong.
So how did you manage the logistics of this? Was this outsourced to like the delivery people themselves to figure out the best way, or did you actually have IT sitting in Berlin directing every single shortest route?
We had that in Berlin. We actually managed all IT out of Berlin, and we had a logic that depending on what kind of mode of transportation you're using to deliver food, you got different routes and you got different orders as well. So we had, example in Hong Kong, we had motorbikes, we had people walking, so the orders were very close or up the hill. People on foot would get and get to deliver, and other ones that are further away, the guys on the motorbike. So, but I think that's the important part, and that's something that you realize then once markets get traction and start to work for you, and you start to grow in certain markets, that you reach limitations with a very centralized approach. And you need to adapt to local markets. You need to adapt from an operational level. It starts with that on the operation, on the logistics side. It continues with how to build an app and what kind of devices you need to cater to. And in Indonesia, BlackBerry is somehow still big.
Good Canadian product.
Indeed. Unfortunately, it's extremely hard to build a proper app on a BlackBerry. But yes, and then you have Mexico, where suddenly Windows phones have a 25% market share. So if you want to be successful in Mexico, you need a Windows phone app. And then you start to adapt. And it starts from a technology logistics point of view, that continues with operations, and that even touches IT. Even though we had all our developers sitting in Berlin and everything done from Berlin, you then face issues like in Kazakhstan, you're not allowed to have user data outside of the country. So unfortunately, if you base everything on AWS, there is no Amazon server in Kazakhstan. And you need to figure out a totally different server infrastructure for Kazakhstan. Similar issues with Russia, by the way. So, and you start to realize that it's stuff that you don't look into at the beginning. And that are the challenges that you only see once certain markets work, and you start to scale those markets. You need to adapt from operation, technical, but also on the marketing part of things. So performance marketing, just doing performance marketing like we do it in Europe, it's not working in most of the emerging markets, unfortunately. And in Bangladesh, more people visit Facebook than Google. You talk about markets like Saudi Arabia, where Facebook is blocked 100%. What do you use then? If you have a very standardized Facebook remarketing funnel that you use around the world, you need to adapt to that. And the continuous is probably most important to also adapt the whole brand positioning. What does a brand stand for? How do you deal with the brand per market? My favorite example is Russia. We started out in Russia as Food Panda. Our brand was Food Panda. We were in the market. never understood why the brand doesn't work and why people not really order and why the conversion rate is so bad compared to other markets. And what we realized at some point then, after talking to a lot of people, is that the panda in the name relates to China, China relates to the Soviet Union relates to the bad times where there was no sushi in Russia. So, and that is connections that you first need to build and where you have to do your market research. So I believe in two different ways to scale internationally. Either one, if you can have a very centralized approach, it's this mushroom strategy and just putting seeds somewhere, seeing what works, what doesn't work, or a very well researched approach, and going very focused into markets where you know your product is going to work.
If you had to do over from the beginning, would you have gone with the approach that you went with, or would you do a more research approach, or somewhere halfway between?
I think I would have skipped some markets. Mainly Azerbaijan, where you can't get a working visa as a German, which kind of sucks to build a business if you can't go there. On the other hand, I think if you have funding and if you have the ambition to scale quickly and want to build up a quick test, I would go with the mushroom strategy. Again, I would do it again.
Now, you've explained an awful lot of operational and also marketing challenges and your approach to centralize the solutions in Berlin. Did you end up having difficulty just with team operations in figuring out what the problems were, or even that the problems existed, given the central location? Or how did you solve and overcome those?
I think that's one of the major challenges when internationalizing, right? That you need to stay close to the market even though you're not there. That's two ways. Either you're very strong people managing the market as country managers, giving you the input to understand the business model, and then it comes a lot onto how do you onboard new country managers. And the other part of things is having extremely tight data monitoring.